Welcome to our panel on a global perspective on financial capability. We're going to be talking today about financial capabilities and financial literacy and the challenges they bring in different national contexts. So we're going to look at this across multiple countries. And I've got a great panel assembled here to help us do that. I'm Mark Fenton-O'Creevy. I'm a Professor of Organisational Behaviour at the Open University Business School. But I also spend a lot of time looking at the psychology of financial decision making. It's got a particular interest in issues of financial capability. Directly opposite me, we have Martin Upton. Martin heads up the Open University Business School Centre for the Public Understanding of Finance. And the Centre for the Public Understanding of Finance is a centre that has a particular interest in issues of financial capability. So welcome, Martin.
Thank you.
Sitting to Martin's left, we have John Olukuru. John comes from Strathmore University in Kenya. John has a background in finance, has also done a lot of work with entrepreneurs and will give us a Kenyan perspective on financial capability and on financial literacy issues. Sitting next to me, we have Ainura Kaldarova, and Ainura comes from Narcos University in Kazakhstan, and Ainura again has a background in finance and accounting and is going to give us a particularly interesting perspective on Kazakhstan and financial capability in Kazakhstan, not least because Kazakhstan's been through this transition from a Soviet-era state-managed economy through to much more of a liberal market economy nowadays. So we're going to start off, Martin, I'm going to ask you to say a little bit about some of the issues about financial capability you see in the UK.
Well, Mark, there are at least 4 hurdles people have got to get over before they can be truly capable in the financial marketplace. The first is the issue of financial education. Most adults in this country have not received financial education, so they're poorly placed to make personal finance decisions. Things are better for their children, who now receive financial education at schools, but it's too early to say how effective that education is. We'll only find out in a few decades' time.
And is it true to say that's mostly sort of been associated with maths curriculum and quite factual, or is that something that's changing as well?
I think in many schools you're seeing it added on to the maths curriculum in terms of who provides it. Yeah. But to be frank, I think schools are having to make pragmatic decisions about who provides this education. Yeah. You have not got personal finance educators roaming around schools ready to do personal finance education. Many are taking it on and saying themselves that they are not sufficiently educated in personal finance to do the training. Yeah. So therein is a big problem. But even if you become financially educated, 3 more hurdles you've got to get over. The first is access to financial services. You can be educated and clever when it comes to money, but if you haven't got a good credit rating, you can't borrow. The next hurdle is actually being sensible and shrewd when it comes to making decisions between products. Because even if you're educated, you've got access to financial services, then you're confronted by an array of products when it comes to making choices. Mm-hmm. And whilst the banks and building societies might put on friendly faces, particularly in their TV adverts, when it comes down to it, they're there to sell products. Yes. Okay? So you've got to be clued up and streetwise when it comes to choosing the right product for you. And when you choose those products, it may be some time since you've had your financial education, okay? And you may have sort of, gone off the boil a bit in terms of what's got to be decided between. Okay, you've got education, you've got access, you're okay when it comes to making decisions. 3 hurdles crossed, but the 4th hurdle comes back to your area of research in particular. Even at the point of making decisions, people may be extremely prone to behavioural biases, which actually mean they end up making poor decisions or making no decision, which they think is, well, it's not a problem, I haven't made a decision. But hang on a second, if you haven't made a decision in the financial marketplace, that's still a decision. Yeah. A decision not to switch to a new savings account is a decision to stay with the existing one. Yeah. Okay?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a really interesting point about the behavioural side of it. And one of the things that always strikes me is that government regulation often concentrates on the information that people are given. Exactly. Often results in people being given enormous amounts of information.
Yeah.
Financial services firms in their advertising, are often looking to tug at people's emotions.
They do.
And by and large, they're much better at influencing people's behaviour through tugging at their emotions than governments are at influencing people's behaviour by insisting they get lots and lots of information. Yeah. I wanted to turn to you, John, now and say, is this, some of the things that Martin's talked about, is this a picture you also recognise in Kenya?
Yeah, I was quite impressed with that because I thought UK being a developed country, there'll be a huge gap between Kenya and the UK. But those 4 hurdles you mentioned is exactly what you also go through in Kenya. Because in reality, as Martin just mentioned, was that today the adults lack the financial literacy education. But at least what's happened to the UK, the students are also getting in that. So the same thing is happening to us, that most of the adults today have no idea of what they should invest in. But with the mobile technology coming in line, so many people are accessing finance through the mobile phones. So nobody is teaching them how much credit are you really getting? Are you really able to repay back all those credits? Yeah. Yes. So that's something else that's coming up, which like the 4 hurdles, but in a different perspective of a developing country.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm going to come back to some of these differences because I think they're really important to talk about. But let me first turn to you, Ainura, and ask, again, some of the things that Martin and John have been talking about, are there things that you recognise in Kazakhstan too?
Yes, it is true for our country as well, especially the financial education part, because financial education in our country is given only for those students who are majoring in business, in management, in finance, but no school pupil are educated in finance. This is the main problem here in Kazakhstan. That's the main issue that we're struggling with. We're trying to introduce this personal finance courses in the curriculum of the school program, but we're just in the beginning of this journey. Yeah. And elder people also doesn't have any financial education due to their own background, because all of them are specialized in their some fields of their study, but not in finance. Finance wasn't that much like most chosen professions. Yeah. That's true.
We only introduced personal financial education in England in schools in 2014, just a few years ago. So we're in very early days. It happened earlier elsewhere in the UK, but England came along last out of the 4 countries that constitute the UK. Sorry.
Yeah. So you talked about the problem of financial education, but these issues of people understanding the different kinds of financial products and making good choices about them, is that something that you also recognise, and the way in which that's, the issues about how that's regulated and the kind of information firms need to provide?
Yes, but probably the most widespread products is like the deposits and the loans that people are taking, but no other financial instruments are like advertised or some kind of promoted. And normal people, ordinary people, do not know about financial products beside those deposits and loans.
So I think this is
a problem for our country as well.
So this is probably a good point to start to turn to some of those differences, because I know one of the things you're telling me about is that the transition that Kazakhstan's been through from Soviet era economy, your parents' generation had many things done for them by the state they didn't have to think about the financial consequences of, in terms of pension provision, health provision, the provision of accommodation, or these kinds of things between the state and the employer. That was largely taken care of, and now. For people of your generation and younger, you largely come up in an economy in which it's been necessary to make a lot more financial decisions for yourselves and think about financial products and so on. And I guess one of the interesting things for me in all of this, we talk about financial education, but of course a lot of people get a lot of their financial capability from seeing what their parents do and in their families. But that sounds like that doesn't work quite like that in Kazakhstan yet.
That's true. We are really struggling with this, changes in financial world of our country. The thing is that we used to have the Soviet Union system in the beginning, since we have only 28 years since we got our independence. And we used to have their old system. For example, if we're talking about pension system, it was solidary pension system, which says that you are just working and the government will provide you with the pensions in the future.
Yeah.
But now we're going through the process of getting to the new system, which is you work, you do this pension payments, 10%, which is 10% for our country, and you are doing your own savings for your pension. So it is hard for us to go through this process. And now even elder people who are receiving their pension, if they had some work experience till 1998, they will receive the pension as the Soviet Union system and partly as the new system.
Yes.
And for sure, for us, for younger generation, it will work as you save for your future on your own. And you have to do some financial decisions concerning that, because now we have only one pension fund, unified pension fund, which accumulates all the money and invests it. Now it is invested by one company, which is the subsidiary of the National Bank. But
that's changing now.
That's changing. This is a challenge. And now, in the future, people are supposed to do their decision on their own. The thing is that they have to choose the company which will manage their investments. And they have to be responsible for their own money, not the state. So the risks are now passed to the person who are investing, working.
And have some of these companies been selling their products quite aggressively?
Yes, that's true. Before this unified pension fund, we had several pension funds, commercial ones, who aggressively advertised their services. But the problem came here is that they started to have low returns, low performance.
Yeah.
That is the problem for the pension savings, right? That's why this decision was made for having unified pension system, pension fund. But in the future, again, the responsibility for investing their own money, people have to do themselves.
There's some big differences in the way things are worked out in the two countries, but there is this common theme, I think we're seeing, of greater shift of responsibility for managing financial risks by the employer and by the government, to much more focus on decisions about financial risks and managing those risks for the individual. Is that something that you've seen in Kenya too?
Yes, it is. And I think one key thing about Kenya is that it's an entrepreneurial country, and people...
With a very, very large informal economy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So most people try to think they can be able to come up with their own businesses.
Yes.
Every student, every employee out there always have something else on the side which they always try to work on.
Yes.
And based on that, you realize it's very difficult to have a formal pension scheme covering for everyone. Yes. So 61% of the whole entire population are not under the formal pension scheme.
And is the issue there really about people relying for their old age on family and children?
Initially, that was the idea, that it never used to make sense for anyone to pay for national health care or to pay for the National Security Fund, because they believed that at the end of the day, if I invest my son and my daughter, when they finish, when I'll be old, they'll be the one taking care of me. But now the structure is changing, because you find the younger generation is coming up, they have smaller families, they try to really think, if I have to make money today, let me see what I can be able to invest. And that's where the whole sense of personal finance again comes in.
So these changes in demographics and size of families and so on having a big impact on the kinds of financial decisions people have to make.
Exactly. And the government has really now been pushing because they're trying to come up and see if they go down to the small businesses. Now, we used to have the small, medium enterprises. Now they're always changing to medium size enterprises. How can you manage them to really start having a formal pension scheme? So I was just trying to check through something today, and I realized the government was pushing for every individual in an informal sector to start contributing 20 pence every month towards a pension. I'm like, okay, how much will that be in a year? How much will be in 3 years? It won't be possible. And you realize nobody is there to flag out and say that could not be possible. Could somebody do an actuarial design, an actuarial model to realize that could not be okay, but maybe go back to the mobile phones. If I'm using airtime for this much, what percentage can I have out of that for it? So a few things are still happening. So the government is regulating on that. They've come up with a number of plans to support the informal sector. They're making them come up with kind of saving credit associations.
So if we go back to something else you were talking about earlier, you mentioned this use of phones in Kenya. And that's quite important in terms of the financial infrastructure in Kenya and the kind of capabilities people need. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about how phones are an important part of payment systems.
Yes. That's the big financial revolution that has happened in Africa, I could say, not just in Kenya, because in Kenya, it was the first place we had the mobile payment via M-Pesa, so Pesa meaning money, then M-Pesa, so mobile money. So that was the starting point. Then we have Econet now in South Africa, began in Zimbabwe, and now it's covered everything up to the West Africa side.
So a very high proportion of the population using these kinds of systems.
At the moment, you could say more than 70% of Kenyans have smartphones, and over 80-90% have at least a mobile phone. So you realize it will be much more easy for me to transfer money from here today in the UK to my mom who is 600 miles away from Nairobi using a mobile phone. I just need to go and press a code, get some money, and she'll get whatever pounds I'm sending to her.
And does that mean that the sort of locus of financial education is shifting more towards use of phones and so on?
Yes. At the moment, people are being educated. You are having your money on the phone, but it's earning zero interest. I can have £300 on my phone, and I'll keep it there for 5 months. I'm not using it at all. I'm just happy to have my money there. If it was in a bank, it would have earned some interest. But the worry is I'm not guaranteed I'll go to the bank and get it anytime I need it. But with this, I can be able to get there. So what has been happening also, the same thing goes back to what Matt was saying, that financial institutions will come to educate you on how to use that money. But in reality, they're promoting their products. So mobile companies have come up with financial products, which at the end of the day will be kind of they're offering overdraft. They allow you to spend more than what your phone could hold, but next time you top it up, they take it with an interest. And that's how increased their revenues. They'll be able to push you and say, you can still borrow from your mobile account, use your mobile number to borrow how much you need. But in reality, again, they're just promoting their product. Okay.
So the phones are, on the one hand, they're changing the kind of financial education and learning people might need to be able to cope with these new approaches. But on the other hand, I think you seem to be suggesting that they can also be part of the solution in the sense that people are using their mobile phones already for financial transactions. Is this now a platform for financial education?
It's part of a solution, but the other side is a challenge because, of course, always the regulator is always behind of innovation. She'll find they'll always be worried. Is this the right thing? It took a while for the government to approve the mobile payment services. Now they're okay with that. It took a while for them to realize, okay, fine, can we use this to ensure that now people can trade using mobile phones? At the moment, they're struggling to see, should mobile lending platforms be accredited like banks? Because at the moment now, if I go to the bank, they have to check my credit score before they give me a loan. But with the mobile lending apps, you just get there and borrow whatever you need. And I can have 4 or 5 lending applications, which I can use to borrow, pay the other one, I get a better credit score, and I keep on borrowing. It's not regulation. So it's a challenge and also a solution on both ways.
So that I think that's really interesting. In a sense, there's this issue about regulation being able to keep up with the pace of change and innovation. And Ainura, I know that the banking system's been through a lot of change in Kazakhstan, and there's been in many ways a rapid pace of change over the last 28 years. Has regulation been able to keep up with the pace of change?
Yeah, regulations are okay in the banking sphere, but probably it is not perfect as in any banking sphere, probably. For now, we have two-tier banking system. The first level is the central bank, and the second level is the banks other than central bank. These all banks, the second-tier banks are regulated by the central bank, and the central bank plays the role of the regulator. They're making the rules also. They're providing the last lending resort,
Yes.
works like last lending resort, and all these things. But the thing is that the problem with our banking system is that not all the population believes in the sustainability of banking sphere. This is a problem for our country because
But you've been through a period of hyperinflation within the history we're talking about.
When we gained our independence, we had these times of hyperinflation, and inflation rate was 2,860%. Do you believe that? That's really huge amounts for the inflation. But for now, for this year, we have 5.3% inflation, which is quite good for us.
But when you have that in people's memories, it obviously creates trust issues in terms of if I put my money in a bank, is it just going to become worth nothing very quickly?
This is one situation, but another situation is that we had some serious bankruptcies situations. That's why people also do not trust the banks. This is the problem for us. They better think that I would better keep my money under the mattress than I'll go to invest in the bank. So this is the situation for us.
For the economy, if the banks haven't got money, then they're not in a position to lend.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah.
I think always something as well, just to comment on what Ainura just brought in there about trust, because it comes into governance. Okay, so you realize if a bank has collapsed in the past, so people don't really trust banks at all. So we've had such kind of an issue whereby it comes in and people realize that's why mobiles now becomes more profitable to people. Like I can access my money and I trust what's on a mobile phone. But you send me a bank statement at the end of the month, but I'm not sure I'll get my money. When the managers mess up in the governance scenarios and the banks collapse, so they go under receivership, then people don't get money. So we had such a situation 2 years ago, and people just withdrew their money from the banks. Yeah. And most informal sector people use their money using the mobile phone. They save everything on a mobile phone, which is surprising. And I think that's where now the regulator is coming in, the issue of the tax you mentioned some time, that despite the fact people will try to save, then you want to access your pension and make an investment. So the tax problem comes in. So the informal sector are so happy to use the mobile phone because the government can't access that. So I can make £1,000 in a day through my all informal businesses, but no one can access that. So that's what I'm only using at the end of the day.
So I'm going to draw things to a conclusion now, but it seems to me there is an interesting story here that we've been discussing, which is there's some really strong common issues across all three countries. But what we're seeing in each of those countries is quite rapid change that's being driven by there's different drivers in each of the countries. But again, we come back to this commonality, not of exactly the same sets of financial capabilities having to be managed and being prioritised in each country, but this common issue of the rapidly changing financial context, new technologies, new ways of thinking about financial risks, shifts of risks from government to individuals and so on, that is driving change in the things that people need to be able to understand and learn how to do. And interesting questions about how do we make sure we're keeping pace with those kinds of challenges, whether it's through regulation, the kinds of financial education we offer, or indeed the lessons that we might learn from each other's countries. Thank you very much for a fascinating conversation, and I hope it's been of interest to our audience. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.